You enter a mine, but you never leave. You get into a taxi, but your passenger was never alive. Vanished people, chilling recordings, and questions that remain unanswered. Are you ready? Because these stories won't let you go. Deep beneath the frozen mountains of Iceland lies an abandoned mine. It was first opened in 1924 and at the time was one of the most valuable mining sites in the country. But within a few years, workers began reporting strange occurrences deep inside the tunnels. Faint whispers, distant footsteps, the sound of something scraping against the stone walls. At first, the company dismissed these claims. Stress, exhaustion, hallucinations, excuses were easy. But then, the disappearances began. The first to vanish was Olaf Sigurdsson, a miner who entered the tunnels for his shift one night and was never seen again. His tools were found exactly where he had left them. His lunchbox, untouched. His lantern, still burning. But Olaf, he was gone. A week later, 2 more workers disappeared, and then an entire night shift vanished without a trace. But the nightmare that sealed the mine's fate happened in 1927. That night, 34 miners were working underground when they heard something, a deep metallic scratching, coming from inside the rock. One of the workers placed his hand on the stone wall and felt it vibrating. Then, the screaming started. The lights flickered and went out. Something emerged from the tunnel's darkest corner. It wasn't human. It was tall, emaciated, with unnaturally long limbs. Its fingers were twisted, almost spider-like. It had no eyes, but every miner felt it watching them. Panic set in. Men ran in every direction, but the tunnels had changed. They were no longer the same. Some miners ran for the entrance, only to find themselves right back where they started. Others sprinted down passageways that should have led outside, but led to dead ends instead. The lucky ones died quickly. The others, they simply disappeared. When rescue teams entered the mine the next morning, not a single body was found, only bloody handprints on the walls. But one man survived. His name was Halldór Peterson. When the rescuers found him, he was sitting on the cold ground staring at the wall. But something was wrong. Halldór had no arms, no legs. There were no wounds, no blood, no sign of amputation. It was as if his limbs had never existed. His mouth hung open, but no sound came out. He never spoke again. The Icelandic government immediately sealed the mine. It was declared off-limits for the next 50 years. But that didn't stop the legends. Locals claimed that anyone who got too close would hear something from inside, a deep, raspy breath, and sometimes scratching. In 2021, a group of 5 paranormal investigators broke into the mine. They wanted to prove once and for all whether the stories were true. They had drones, thermal cameras, and night vision equipment. For the first few hours, nothing happened. They found rusted tools, collapsed walls, and abandoned helmets. Then, at exactly 2:46 a.m., the first sign of something unnatural. One of the team members grabbed his throat. He couldn't breathe. The cameras captured everything. His skin began to cave in as if invisible hands were crushing him. His friends panicked, dragging him toward the entrance. But then, the lights flickered and went out. The thermal cameras kept rolling, and in the farthest, darkest corner of the tunnel, something moved, something big. It was clinging to the ceiling, its body twisted, unnatural, bent at angles no human could survive. And then it turned its head. The screen cut to static. The rest of the team ran, but the mine wouldn't let them leave. The tunnels had changed again. The last remaining investigator, Eric, kept recording. His camera was shaking. He was gasping for breath, but the microphone was still working. It captured a sound, something scraping against the stone walls. Then, a breath. Then, Eric's scream. When authorities entered the mine the next day, they found no one, only Eric's camera. and a message scratched into the entrance of the mine. "We have taken new souls." The authorities never released the footage. All camera recordings were classified by the Icelandic government, and anyone who tried to retrieve them was silenced. But today, locals still say the mine isn't empty, that on some nights, if you stand outside the entrance, you'll hear something moving inside, and if you listen closely, you'll hear a whisper, "Send us more people." Alexei had been a night shift taxi driver in Moscow for years. The cold Russian nights didn't bother him anymore. Snowstorms, drunk passengers, sketchy people. He'd seen it all. But that night, he would pick up someone he would never forget. It was 1:45 a.m. when his phone lit up with a new ride request. Pickup location, Petrovsky Park, destination, Vedenskoye Cemetery. He frowned. Who would want to go to a cemetery in the middle of the night? But money was money. He accepted the request and hit the gas. As he approached the pickup point, he spotted a lone figure standing under the dim glow of a flickering street lamp. She was tall and thin, dressed in an old-fashioned grey coat, black gloves, and a thick scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. Her head was slightly tilted downward, her face barely visible. Alexei rolled down the window slightly. "Did you call for a taxi?" The woman slowly nodded. Without saying a word, she got into the back seat. Her movements were eerily silent. No rustling of clothes, no sound of footsteps. Something about her unsettled him. But he ignored the feeling, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb. The woman remained silent as they drove. Alexei glanced at her in the side mirror. She was there. But when he checked the rear-view mirror, the back seat was empty. His stomach tightened. He swallowed hard and forced himself to keep his eyes on the road. "Why are you going to the cemetery?" he asked. After a long pause, the woman finally spoke. Her voice was hollow, emotionless, almost metallic. "I'm going home." A chill ran down his spine. He tried to focus on driving, but the uneasy feeling kept growing. "Where are you from?" he asked, his voice barely steady. The woman slowly turned her head toward him. For the first time, he saw her face clearly. She had no eyes. Two deep, empty black voids stared back at him. Alexei's breath caught in his throat. He gripped the steering wheel tighter. His hands were clammy, his pulse racing. Then, without warning, the woman lunged forward, a long, rusted knife in her hand. Alexei barely had time to react before she plunged the blade into his left shoulder. He screamed in pain, swerving wildly. The tires screeched as the car skidded across the icy road. The woman let out a horrific, distorted laugh, a sound that wasn't human. It echoed, layered like multiple voices overlapping in a sickening chorus. She raised the knife again, aiming for his throat. Alexei did the only thing he could. He yanked the wheel, sending the taxi hurtling toward a metal pole, a deafening crash. Then, silence. Alexei's eyes fluttered open, blinding white lights, a ceiling fan spinning lazily above him, the distant beeping of a heart monitor. He was in a hospital. His right arm was wrapped in bandages. His whole body ached. A doctor and a few nurses stood at his bedside. The doctor gave him a reassuring smile. "You're lucky, Mr. Alexei. You had a serious accident, but you survived." Alexei's throat was dry. His voice came out hoarse. "The woman, where is she? The woman in my back seat." The doctor's smile faded. "What woman?" Alexei's heartbeat pounded in his ears. "The woman I picked up. Petrovsky Park. She stabbed me." The doctor exchanged a glance with the nurse. "Mr. Alexei, you were alone in the car when the paramedics arrived." "No." His breath hitched. "That's impossible. She was there. I felt the knife. I saw her." The doctor's expression darkened. "You don't have any stab wounds." Alexei's hands trembled as he touched his left shoulder. It hurt. It ached. But there was no wound, no stitches. 2 weeks later, Alexei quit his job as a taxi driver. But before he could move on, he made the mistake of looking into the past. In 1953, a woman took a taxi from Petrovsky Park to Vedenskoye Cemetery. She stabbed the driver to death. She was never caught. And the most terrifying part? His car's dashcam had been recording the entire time. The footage showed him screaming, swerving, fighting something. But in the back seat, there was nothing.